Hi guys, it's me, HD, and welcome to tonight's qualifying preview for this weekend's 2023 Spanish Grand Prix. Hope you guys are doing well. Of course, we've already had a couple practice sessions earlier today at a not too hot Spanish Grand Prix. Obviously, the Grand Prix taking place 2 to 3 weeks later than it would do normally. Normally, it'd be like middle of May, even start of May, the Spanish Grand Prix. But yeah, you would have expected it to be quite a hot weekend. But looking at the temperatures, not as hot as you would expect for this Grand Prix. And today it was a bit cloudy at times in Catalonia. So yeah, it's not exactly the hottest race in Spain you'll ever see. And looking at the weather, it doesn't look like it's going to be a very hot, dry weekend. So yeah, we'll see how that plays an effect possibly in the Grand Prix weekend. But yeah, with practice 1 and practice 2 happening today, of course, after practice 2, the most representative session of the weekend so far, I will be getting into the data from practice 2, of course looking at what the results were and getting into the sector time data to see where certain teams are quick, where certain teams are quite slow. And then, of course, we'll get into upgrades because there have been some more upgrades that have been announced today. A big one for Aston Martin on the front wing, which I will show you guys in a bit, which has seen them improve quite a bit from what I expected already so far this weekend, which is really good to see. So, yeah, we'll get into that soon enough. But, yeah, we'll get into the data from practice 2. Look at how teams are doing, and then, of course, I'll give my absolute final prediction for qualifying here in Spain. Of course, only my top 10 prediction it'll be for qualifying. And then after that, we'll go into the teams in a bit more of an in-depth fashion and get into how I think they'll get on and talk about just what the keys will be, I guess, for each team in qualifying. Final thing I want to say quick, as usual, hope all you guys are doing well, and no matter what time it is in your part of the world and where you're watching from, hope you're all having a great time. But before we get into the teams, let's of course start with the results of practice 2. So Max Verstappen ended up quickest on a 1:13.9, almost 0.2 of a second quicker than Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. Red Bull look a lot quicker already at this part of the weekend than I thought they would be. I didn't think they would be quite this quick. Obviously, I thought Ferrari would be a lot quicker. Obviously, yesterday in my weekend preview, I did predict that Ferrari would be, in my view, at the time, on pole position for this weekend's race. But safe to say my opinion has changed on that. But yeah, Red Bull look like they're going to dominate the weekend, and Max looks like he's going to, quite frankly, obliterate everybody in sight, and he's going to lap quite a lot of people in Sunday's race. Fernando Alonso then in second. Again, the new upgrade for Aston Martin, which you'll get into later into this stream, really working for them, as he looked very quick, really, throughout all of the sectors. So Alonso looking good for Aston Martin, of course, his home Grand Prix. And then Nico Hülkenberg up in third place. That came out of nowhere. I have no idea how that came about. Hülkenberg going up to third place in the Haas. I did say I thought Haas would be a lot better here than what we saw in Monaco, and I thought they would be a decent shout maybe to get say into the top 10, but I did not think it would be quite this good at this point of the weekend. So yeah, great to see from the Haas F1 team. Of course, in qualifying, they are not going to be quicker than Alpine, Ferrari and Mercedes. I think those teams will most likely be quicker than them, but looks really good so far from the Haas team and for Hülkenberg, who has not really had a great record here in Barcelona, which again has only made it more surprising that he ended up third in the Haas. Sergio Perez ending up in P4. Esteban Ocon in 5th for Alpine. And yeah, Alpine maybe they won't be proved correct in qualifying, but I think they are mostly correct with that bold prediction coming into the weekend that they believed they were right there, if not ahead of Ferrari and Mercedes. They are quite a bit better than I thought they would be. I did expect a drop-off compared to Monaco. I guess so far there is a drop-off, but yeah, they haven't dropped off really that much at all compared to what we saw in Monaco. And Esteban Ocon looking very quick for the Alpine team. Really good to see, because it does give an extra, what the fuck am I talking about? An extra added element to the weekend, because of course Red Bull are going to dominate, but after that, you know, with Aston Martin, Ferrari, Alpine, Mercedes, going to be a very good fight for the rest of the positions from third all the way down to P10. So yeah, it's going to be very close and exciting this weekend between those teams. Charles Leclerc ending up in P6, Carlos Sainz in P7. Ferrari only ran the new upgrade on both cars in practice 2. In practice 1, I think they only ran it on Sainz's car and had Leclerc run the old upgrade. So yeah, they've not had a ton of time with this new side pod, the new floor to go with the side pod as well. So let's calm down with Ferrari. Let's not get too down on them after what we've seen so far. They're definitely not going to be as quick as I predicted them to be, but I think we'll see definitely better tomorrow than what we've seen so far today. And then George Russell in 8th place for Mercedes, half a second down on Red Bull in practice 2, which, I mean, doesn't sound that bad compared to what it's been like this season, but given that Red Bull are going to show a lot more speed tomorrow, yeah, Mercedes are in quite a bad position. And to me, at the minute, as I'll get on to soon, they look to be probably the, probably the 5th fastest team here. Maybe 4th at best. Again, it is going to be close in that, say, bottom half of the top 10. But yeah, from what I've seen so far, it looks like they have probably the 5th best car for qualifying. Again, I would be very surprised if Haas F1 were quicker than them in quali. Would be quite a shock to see Mercedes get seemingly worse with their new upgrades than they were before. But yeah, not a good day for Mercedes. Their car just did not look anywhere near as good as the Red Bull and Aston Martin cars. Valtteri Bottas, 9th for Alfa Romeo. I did say coming into the weekend, look out for Alfa Romeo and Bottas as well, because Valtteri has always been very quick here in Spain at this circuit. So yeah, looking decent so far for him. And then in P10, Pierre Gasly, almost a quarter of a second slower than his teammate. Definitely needs to cut that gap down to Ocon. Not a surprise Ocon's quicker than him, but if it is really close in that second half of the top 10 in qualifying, Gasly's going to be a big loser if he's 2 or 3 tenths of a second slower than his teammate. But for Alpine overall, it is looking very good for them. And then the bottom half of the top 10, Lewis Hamilton in P11. Very surprised he was not quicker than Russell, because this is normally a circuit where Lewis is very quick. Oscar Piastri in P12. Doesn't look as bad for McLaren, though, as you may think. And I'll get onto that in a moment with the sector times, which does paint a more accurate picture, I think, of where McLaren are. Zhou just behind Piastri in 13th, then Lando Norris in 14th. Kevin Magnussen 15th, and yeah, to be 6 tenths of a second, or is he 6 tenths of a second? I think closer actually to half a second slower than Hülkenberg is quite bad. So yeah, Magnussen, I am hoping and expecting for a much better day tomorrow from him. Given the Haas car looks good, really, we should see better from him. And then Nick De Vries in 16th. Good to see him ahead of Tsunoda and definitely showing better performance. Tsunoda obviously in 17th. Lance Stroll in 18th place. Now, I don't know if he did his quickest run on the soft or the medium, but if it was on the soft, then, well, that is one of the worst laps that I have seen from Stroll well, so far this season at least. For him to be nearly a second slower than his teammate is unacceptable around this track. I know it's not the easiest track in the world, but it's not as, it's not hard to the point where you can be losing that much time to, say, a driver who's better skilled for this type of circuit and just better skilled in general. Yeah, so 18th needs to be improved upon massively tomorrow. And then the two slowest people in the end, Alex Albon and Logan Sargent, of course, both for Williams. And yeah, Williams do look to be the slowest team here in Spain, which is not really a surprise, but I am surprised they're not at least, closer to, say, AlphaTauri ahead. I didn't think they'd be clearly the worst team here in Barcelona. One thing I will do quickly, though, which I forgot to do before we move on any further, let me just start up a poll in the chat to ask you guys, who do you think will get pole for the Spanish Grand Prix? So I'll just set that up quick. And the options, of course, will be Verstappen, Perez, and then Alonso and Leclerc. And yeah, make sure to let me know, guys. Who do you think gets pole position? I'll get onto my predictions in a moment. But let's first get into the sector time data from practice 2 to see, again, where certain teams are, showing good speed and where certain teams are losing out quite a bit. So we'll start the first sector. The first sector is the least important at this track because the first sector is the main straight, which is quite long. Then turn 1, which is a medium speed corner. And then turn 2 is pretty much flat out. And then turn 3 is pretty much flat out. If it's not flat out, then, the smallest of lifts. And then you hit the time beam for the first sector. It's a pretty simple sector 1 here at the Circuit De Catalunya. And in the first sector, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes was actually the quickest today. Bit surprising because Mercedes are normally not quite strong in high-speed sections where, straight line speed obviously is quite important in that first sector. The only thing I can think as to why, Mercedes were the quickest today is maybe they're running with a bit less wing to not be too slow in the first sector because, of course, if you do put too much wing on for the middle and final sector, I mean, obviously it'll be great, for looking after your tyres. Maybe even great in qualifying, but in the race, if anyone can get within a second of you and open DRS, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble down the main pit straight, and it should be easier to overtake this weekend with the final 2 corners now being almost flat out, the pair of them. So, yeah, that might explain why Mercedes are, the fastest team in the first sector from what we saw in practice 2. Haas, no real surprise, them looking so quick. Of course, they're Ferrari powered, and the Ferrari power unit is probably the strongest throughout the field. Red Bull, third. You maybe could say that's a surprise, but really, I think, given their dominance and clear gap to the rest of the field, they don't have to set their car up in a way that is quick down the straights here in Barcelona because, again, they have that clear advantage over the rest. Aston Martin, I will say they are doing a good speed in Sector 1, nearly half a tenth quicker than Ferrari. I would not have expected that in the first sector. I would have expected Ferrari to be quicker, given you have that long DRS straight. But good to see that Aston Martin are so quick in the first sector. McLaren, not too bad as well. A tenth slower than Mercedes overall. Again, though, I do get a feeling that McLaren are possibly running again like Mercedes. A bit less wing, possibly, just to make sure they're not too slow down the main pit straight for the race on Sunday. Of course, they can still make changes to the car. It is only Friday, and you don't have to, you can still play around with your setup up until the start of qualifying. So, there is still plenty of time for McLaren to get the setup right. But I wouldn't be surprised if some of the slower cars in a straight line decide to, not run with as much wing this weekend, just to make sure they're not too slow in that first sector. So in the race, they can, for one, if they are faster than a car ahead, be able to overtake, but also if a car behind them is faster and has better straight line speed, they do not want to be too slow down the straights, because if you are, you can get really punished quite badly. I remember Toro Rosso in 2015, when they had Sainz and Verstappen as their two drivers, locked out the third row of the grid, but had no straight line speed down the main pit straight and were overtaken by a lot of cars, it felt like, in that race. So yeah, it's definitely something you have to make sure you don't fall foul of. Alpine, a bit surprising there, 0.2 of a second slower in the first sector alone. Can't really explain why that is. Maybe you could say it's because they're running a bit more wing than those other teams, but I'm not quite sure that's why that is. Maybe just trying to run their power unit in a more conservative fashion, as we know, of course, Alpine do have reliability troubles. The three slowest teams, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri and Williams, and you will see that trend continue in the next sector, Sector 2 as well, and mostly in Sector 3. Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri and Williams overall do seem to be the three slowest teams from what we've seen so far from practice. And then into Sector 2, which is the most important sector at this track because it is the longest, of course, almost half a minute, and Verstappen only just under half a minute in that middle sector. 0.002 of a second quicker than Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. So pretty much Red Bull and Aston Martin so far on the same pace in the middle sector. Very impressive pace from McLaren. I just don't think they'll be able to maintain that, though, in qualifying. I'd be very surprised if they were, third or fourth best team in the middle sector tomorrow. I think that's going to drop off compared to what we've seen today. Even though Lando Norris ended up behind Oscar Piastri, though, again, from what we've seen in the first two sectors, McLaren are not as bad as what the overall results from practice 2 have shown. They're definitely, a tad better, at least, than what we saw in practice 2. But they're definitely slower, in my view, than the top 5 teams, being Red Bull, Aston Martin, Ferrari, Alpine, and Mercedes in that order. So, yeah, they're still not great. It's still not looking, surprisingly better, say, than what we were expecting. I came into this weekend saying that at best they would be the 6th best team. So, yeah, McLaren looking okay, I would say, but nothing that really they are, going to be excited about going into the rest of the weekend. Ferrari, 4th quickest team. Looking at the gap, though, between them, Aston Martin and Red Bull, there's no real big surprises as to, them being slower than those teams. The only thing, I guess, which is a positive is that they're not, by the looks of it so far, too much slower than Red Bull and Aston Martin in that middle sector. Again, though, Red Bull, as they usually do, sandbag on a Friday more so than other teams do. So I think Red Bull will be a bit quicker in all of the sectors in qualifying. But yeah, Ferrari don't look as bad as maybe they looked, or maybe people think they looked from practice 2. They are still going to be decently quick in qualifying. Don't worry about that. Haas looking good. Alpine looking, I would say, good as well. Mercedes, though, only the 7th best team in that middle sector. Just simply not good enough. In this middle sector, honestly, compared to teams like Alpine and McLaren, I would have expected them to be, at minimum, just as quick, if not quicker. So it's really the middle sector here where Mercedes are losing the majority of the time, and their car in that middle sector just doesn't look as hooked up to the track, clearly as much as the Red Bull and the Aston Martin, but even as much as, say, the Ferrari car. So, yeah, Mercedes, really, the area they need to work on is, that middle sector, because they're just losing too much time. I mean, the lap time spread in this middle sector is not massive. It is still quite a short sector compared to other sectors you get at different tracks, but, 7th best team in the middle sector, that is not good enough. They need to be, at worst, the 5th best team, I would say, in the middle sector. So really, they need to be, at worst, half a tenth quicker than really what they were doing today in that middle sector. If they can't improve like that, then they're going to be in quite a bit of trouble, because, in the first sector they looked quick, but in the final sector, as you'll see in a moment, they weren't really that quick there. Noticeably quick in the final sector to where they will be able to get themselves out of trouble. And then the final three teams, once again, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri and Williams. As I'll get on to, though, with AlphaTauri, they don't look good from what we've seen so far. 16th and 17th they were in practice 2, but I don't think they will be that bad in qualifying. We saw that actually in Monaco, where I think they ended up in the same positions in practice 2, yet were 9th and 12th in qualifying, and Tsunoda, of course, was going to finish in the points until he had his brake issue. So, yeah, AlphaTauri will improve on what we've seen today. Not sure it'll get them into the top 10, but they will be definitely in the top, probably 13 on the grid, I would imagine, will AlphaTauri. There's definitely more performance there. And Williams, once again, the slowest team. And then in the final sector, which is kind of a slow left-hander of turn, what do you call it? Turn 10, is it? Is it turn 10? I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think it is turn 10. I think the fast uphill right-hander is turn 9, if I am correct. So yeah, that corner is quite slow. And then the corner after that is quite pedestrian as well. And then you have the final two flat-out corners of... and actually, no, I think that the first corner of the final sector, I believe, is actually turn 11, if I'm correct. Yeah, and then obviously the final two corners are... not yet flat out, but I think in qualifying tomorrow, you're going to see the cars, maybe not every car, but most cars going flat out through those final two corners. So, yeah, it's a bit of both, really, in the final sector. High-speed corners, slow-speed corners. And in that final sector, Aston Martin just about quicker than the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, and Aston Martin, as you can see, looking good in all parts of the track, which definitely is a good omen for qualifying and the race as well. Leclerc, not too bad. I've got to say, though, the Ferrari, not very unstable, but compared to Aston Martin and Red Bull, the rear end of their car does look a lot more unstable in those high-speed corners. Something we've been talking about since pre-season testing, where we saw it there, where the rear end of their car was a lot more bouncy, and just wasn't really under the driver, and does look to be an issue so far. So we'll see whether Ferrari can at least limit that, because if they can, then I think they could probably still get a decent qualifying position for the, for the Spanish Grand Prix. Alpine, though, looking very good in that final sector. Quicker by almost a tenth of a second than Mercedes. And yeah, final sector for Mercedes, not looking as bad as it was in the middle sector compared to, a couple midfield teams like, Haas and McLaren, but still not quite good enough. And it's really, again, the middle sector and the final sector to a degree where their car just simply isn't good enough. And I think, again, it is the slower speed corners or even the medium speed corners where they're struggling. They just don't have good grip through those corners. I think the high speed corners, their car's fine, as we've seen in the last year or so. Very good car through high speed corners, but just very pedestrian through the slower speed and medium speed stuff. And that's why I believe they are struggling in the middle and final sector. Again, obviously, in the middle and final sector, not all of the corners are slow and medium speed corners, but there are still a couple of them here or there. So, yeah, that is still costing Mercedes lap time. And then behind Mercedes, you've got Alfa Romeo looking better. AlphaTauri as well. Haas, surprisingly slow in the final sector. Not quite sure why that is. And then you have McLaren, very slow in the final sector, but Williams especially, shockingly slow in that final sector. Not quite sure why they are that much slower than everybody else in the final sector. With McLaren, though, I think Lando Norris did not have a great final sector on his best lap, so could have done better, and I think McLaren are, they're going to be ahead. Well, hold on, let me clarify. They might not be ahead of teams like Alfa Romeo and Haas, but they are not, the 8th or 9th best team, which is what it kind of looked like from practice 2. They're not quite that bad. They're going to be a bit closer to, say, Haas than what we saw in practice 2. So, yeah, McLaren, not as bad as you think, but still pretty poor. And after all of that, and, what happened in practice 2, again, here, a reminder of your top 10 in the session. Let me now, based off of what I've seen so far, and also combined really with my general thoughts coming into the weekend as to who I think would be quick and not so quick, let me now get into my predictions for qualifying, my absolute final predictions for my top 10 in qualifying tomorrow. And I believe instead of a Ferrari on pole position, it will be a comfortable Red Bull front row lockout with Max Verstappen on pole. Verstappen will probably do a late 1 minute 12 for his pole position lap. At worst, a low 13, but I don't see Verstappen being stopped for pole position and for the race win, of course, as well. Sergio Perez will get second because Red Bull clearly have the best car here in all conditions. Alonso, though, in the Aston Martin, I think will pull out at his home Grand Prix a good enough lap to get himself into third. Aston Martin definitely look better with this new upgrade than I thought they would look, of course, coming into the weekend. And with Alonso on absolute top form, I think that's enough to put to see Alonso, end up in third place on the grid. It will be, though, very close between him, Leclerc, and the other home driver, Carlos Sainz. So, yeah, should be a good fight, the best of the rest there. And, yeah, Leclerc, P4, Sainz, P5. And then Esteban Ocon, I think, will qualify in 6th ahead of the Mercedes, just about of Lewis Hamilton, who I still expect to be the quickest Mercedes driver in qualifying. And yeah, I think Alpine do have a faster car than Mercedes, but it will still be close in qualifying given we know how quick Lewis is over a single lap. And this is a circuit where Lewis is pretty special. So yeah, it's going to still be tough for Alpine to be, the best team, say, after the top 3 of Red Bull, Aston Martin and Ferrari. You never know. Maybe Alpine can surprise me and get, ahead of Ferrari and even possibly contend for third on the grid. I really hope that happens because that would really be a massive surprise and really shake up the order behind Red Bull. And then, I think it'll be Hamilton 7th. Lance Stroll will qualify in 8th. George Russell going in 9th. And Kevin Magnussen, I think, will end up in P10. I still expect him to be the quicker Haas driver because he's always been pretty quick around here. And clearly, the Haas car looks good. So I don't see why Magnussen won't deliver a really good effort in qualifying tomorrow. So yeah, that's my top 10 and my prediction there. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with my predictions there, and I'll get into your comments, obviously, later on in the stream. I do want to say, though, quickly, don't forget to subscribe, of course, for more content like this, because tomorrow I'll be live at 11:15 a.m. UK time for the practice 3 watch along, then a watch along of the F2 sprint race, which is promising to be quite exciting. And then we'll be finishing up with the main event of tomorrow, the qualifying watch along for the Spanish Grand Prix. And then, of course, on Sunday, I'll be live from 12 p.m. UK time. The race preview, race watch along, and race reaction. So make sure to join me for all of that. And make sure, for everyone watching, to smash the like button. We're currently on 9 likes. Let's try and get that up to 20 if we can in the next few minutes or so. But before we get on to the teams, let me now get on to upgrades, because we do have now the confirmed list of upgrades for each team that have, of course, brought upgrades here in Spain. So I'll just get that up on my screen and then I'll show you guys. We'll go through it just like we did last week. And yeah, we'll start here. And actually, hold on. Let me just adjust a couple things quickly. Right, so there you go. So, and I'll just get this up on screen quick. So yeah, let's get into these upgrades and we'll go team by team. So for Red Bull, they have a new floor edge and a new diffuser. Now with the floor edge, we showed that yesterday on stream. I will try and show it again in a moment. It's just a new part of, new, I guess, redesign to the part of the floor, just a new curve, essentially, to the floor. It's not a massive upgrade, and as it says, revised edge profile to locally manipulate the surfaces, so it's not really a massive upgrade. And the new diffuser for Red Bull is, it says top corners of the diffuser have been profiled but greater curvature. So yeah, just small upgrades there to continue evolving what is clearly the best car in Formula 1. For Ferrari, they have a circuit-specific upgrade there. The 2 performance ones, though, which we have already shown. Again, I will show it again for anyone who hasn't seen. They have a new Coke/engine cover. That's what they describe it as, but it's a new side pod. Design, as it says here, changing side pod and central bodywork topologies, I think that says. And then a new floor body/edge, which again, we showed yesterday, and I will make sure to show it again in a moment. But so far, Charles Leclerc said it. The car with the new upgrade felt okay, but he's not exactly given it a glowing review so far. So yeah, we'll see whether that actually does in the end help their performance. Mercedes have a couple new performance upgrades. Side pod inlet, they have a mirror vane removed, and on the diffuser it says diffuser sidewall side view profile change. So just a couple small upgrades there for Mercedes to go on with the big upgrade that they had back in Monaco to the side pod and the front suspension. For McLaren, they've got a new front brake duct vane and winglet shape. Don't think on the diagram it shows the exact area where that is, but yeah, just a very small upgrade there for McLaren. And then, here we go. For Aston Martin, you can see here they've got 5 performance upgrades. They have brought quite clearly the biggest upgrade to this Grand Prix, kind of to match what Mercedes and Ferrari have been doing so far. This is really Aston Martin's first big upgrade of 2023, and that's why so far this weekend they've been looking a bit better. So yeah, new front wing, and it says the front wing flap has a different twist distribution with less variation in height across the trailing edge. Again, I'll show you those differences in the front wing soon. New front wing end plate as well. A new, basically, curvature to the end plate of the front wing. Also a new nose. And you can see the nose here, where the green square is. And then new rear wing end plate and a new beam wing And it says with the beam wing, there are 2 subtly different beam wings to suit the new end plates. Of course, the end plate just above. So yeah, big upgrade for Aston Martin. The first big upgrade for them of 2023. Really hope it works for them, because if it does, then they'll really help them finish possibly second in the championship this year. And then finally, AlphaTauri have a couple more upgrades. Obviously, they brought loads at Monaco. They brought like 7 or 8, I think, new aerodynamic pieces in Monaco, and a couple more here in Spain. A new rear wing and a new rear wing end plate as well. So we'll see how that goes for AlphaTauri. And for Williams, those their upgrades are just circuit specific. So yeah, those are all the upgrades officially for all of the teams. Now, here is a picture of the new front wing end plate for Aston Martin. You can see here the arrow pointing, or this hand pointing to the area that has been revised. On the top picture, though, this is the new front wing end plate. On the bottom is the old one. So yeah, you can see just a slight difference in the design in this area. And let me see if I can find any more. Here's a side pod comparison with Ferrari to better show off their new side pod design. So on the bottom is their old side pod, the more like a fishbowl type look. And then on the top, you can see the new side pod, a lot straighter and a lot more like the Red Bull side pod. So a big upgrade for Ferrari, and an upgrade, of course, they desperately needed. Let me see if I can find any more. And can I find any more? Don't think so. Let me just quickly go back to these pictures for a second whilst I find the ones I showed yesterday, and see if I can find any more ones than I've shown so far. Yeah, I'll just quickly show again these upgrades that I showed last night. So this is the new floor edge for Red Bull. On the top, you can see this is the new one for Barcelona. You can see here where the hand is pointing. That area is the redesigned area. On the bottom, you can see a clear difference in the way it flows. It's just a slight redesign there for Red Bull. Again, as I said a moment ago, they're just evolving what is already an amazing car. And here it is with Ferrari, also that new floor. Again, on the top, where the hand is, you can see the new design to the floor. And on the bottom, you can see the old floor. And yeah, the way it curves is a lot more upwards towards the rear of the floor than it is or was before. So obviously, with the side pod design, I think people do forget that it's not all about the side pods when it comes to these cars. It's about the floor. The floor is the most important area of these cars, these ground effect cars. But of course, having the correct design and having it all, work together as an aerodynamic package to make for great pace on track is what matters. So of course, when you make a change to a part of the car, like the side pod, you also have to redesign the floor to match that and to try and get it interacting in the way that you want it to. So yeah, again, important to remind people that it's not about the side pod, it's about the floor. But of course, the side pod design, as we've seen so far this season, it does have an effect on the overall performance of the car, because it's about how it connects with the floor design and makes for a quick car or not. So Ferrari obviously trying to do that, and of course tomorrow we will see legitimately their true performance. And so far doesn't look that great. Maybe they're just holding their cards quite close to their chest. Really hope they are. But Red Bull still looking like the absolute best team here in Barcelona. But before we come to you guys in the chat, and don't worry, I will get to your comments soon, I think it's about time we get into all of the teams and get into a bit more detail how I think they'll get on in qualifying. We'll quickly go through Red Bull. Not much to say on them. They clearly have the best car. Max Verstappen, let me just get him back on screen in the beautiful Red Bull car. Yeah, Max Verstappen looks like he's on a different planet to everybody else. I mean, in practice one, he was 3/4 of a second quicker than Sergio Perez. Yeah, he was incredible in that first practice session and still looked way too good in second practice as well. And I just don't see him being stopped at all this weekend. It would take something incredibly surprising for him not to get pole and win the race and also fastest lap and all of that stuff. He is on another planet to everybody else in that car. If Red Bull, though, do have the advantage, I expect at least half a second advantage to the rest of the field, which is what I think it'll be for them in qualifying, then that should be enough for Sergio Perez, man on screen now, to get onto the front row and to have a much better weekend than what we saw in Monaco. Monaco, of course, he was absolutely horrendous, was Perez, and needs really just at least a second place finish here in Spain to get some confidence going into the races coming up in Montreal, the Red Bull Ring, and Silverstone as well. But yeah, Red Bull, without a doubt, the best team. They're not going to be challenged at all for pole position. Absolutely no way will that happen. Ferrari, next up, as I showed, big upgrades for them. Their real first big upgrade of the season. They were actually saying, I think yesterday, Ferrari, that what do you call it? That they were planning on bringing this upgrade later in the season, but they saw the performance so far this season, and they felt that, yeah, we need to bring it a bit sooner because we're really struggling. And here it is, the new side pod and the new floor. And from what I've seen so far, I've not seen any positive effect. Of course, the reason they brought it to the track is because it must have shown on the it must have shown in the wind tunnel that it was going to be an improvement. But from what I've seen so far, again, I've not seen any clear sign that their car is quicker with this new upgrade. Doesn't mean, to be honest, that if you just put a new side pod and floor together, that you're necessarily going to be, 2-3 tenths of a second automatically quicker. But yeah, I don't think we can right now, truthfully say that Ferrari's upgrade hasn't worked or anything. But from what I've seen so far, as I'll get onto soon, Aston Martin's upgrade looks as though it's had more of an instant impact for them. And with Aston Martin, of course, their upgrade package for this Grand Prix is bigger than Ferrari's. And Ferrari, obviously, the upgrades they've brought are very important to the car, but they're not as many as what Aston Martin have brought. And fundamentally, Aston Martin do have a better car than Ferrari. And we've been waiting quite a few races for Aston Martin to bring their first big proper upgrade of 2023. So, yeah, for qualifying tomorrow, I think they can still get, say, a second row lockout. Definitely still possible. But it's really how they do against Fernando Alonso and the Aston Martin, which matters. Maybe even Esteban Ocon in the Alpine as well, who looks very quick. But I don't see Ferrari on the same pace as Red Bull tomorrow. Red Bull do seem to be just a bit quicker than them this weekend, which is a shame, but that's the way it is from what I've seen. Yeah, Ferrari, I mean, third and fourth on the grid wouldn't be that bad of a result, really, because even in a dry race, they're not going to be easy to overtake because they do have, again, the strongest engine on the grid when it comes to power. But it's not quite as much as what I hoped it would be for them this weekend. And yeah, not quite looking to be as exciting a weekend for Ferrari as I really hoped it would be. And I was definitely inhaling quite a bit of hopium yesterday when it comes to the Scuderia. But maybe, maybe today they were just really sandbagging and just focusing on, getting used to how the car feels with the new upgrade and just getting to grips with it. Maybe tomorrow we will see proper, legitimate, super quick pace. I really hope that is shown by the Ferrari team. But from what I've seen so far, don't think that's going to happen. And yeah, 4th and 5th, I'll go for them. Not because they'll be slow Ferrari, but because Alonso, in what is an improved Aston Martin car, will be enough to get into 3rd place on the grid. And of course, Fernando at his home race, of course, does help when you're at a home race to pull out an extra special performance when you absolutely have to. Carlos Sainz, of course, his home race as well. I expect him to be definitely closer to his teammate in qualifying than he was last year. Last year, he was I think half a second slower nearly than Leclerc, which was quite embarrassing, to be honest. But yeah, we'll see what he can do compared to his teammate. But yeah, I think both Ferraris will definitely be in the top 5 in qualifying. I would be very surprised if they had a legitimately poor qualifying session. That would be quite a shock to me. For the Mercedes-Benz team, of course, they brought their new side pod to the Monaco Grand Prix. And obviously they, redesigned the floor. They have a new suspension as well. As you saw a moment ago, couple smaller upgrades to go with that. They've brought this weekend as well. Doesn't really seem to be having an effect, though, does it? They just don't seem really any quicker from what I have seen since the start of the Monaco Grand Prix weekend than they were before they brought this new side pod and new floor, new suspension. Yeah, I just don't. I don't really know what to say. That they are very poor at the minute. They are, obviously miles behind Red Bull. There is no doubt about that. They're miles behind, I think, Aston Martin. I mean, in a qualifying setting, probably quite a bit slower than Ferrari as well. Obviously, in the race, comes a lot more back towards Mercedes because of Ferrari's inability to manage their tyres well. But yeah, they just don't look good. They really don't look good. Their car doesn't look anywhere near as good, again, as Red Bull and Aston Martin. I think Ferrari will show a lot more pace tomorrow. And really, Mercedes' fight is with Alpine, Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin, only because Stroll is really slow this weekend compared to his teammate, not because, Mercedes are legitimately as quick as Aston Martin or anything. And, even Haas F1, you could say, they're fighting this weekend. It's just so embarrassing to say them this poor. At the start of the season, they were, the 4th best team? Back in Melbourne, which was at the start of April. They were probably, that weekend, the 2nd best team. And things were looking a lot more positive for them. But really, since that Grand Prix, they have been terrible with their pace. Their results have not been too bad. They've really got some great results with what is a pretty shit car for them. But the performance just isn't there. It's really not there. And I have no positive feeling for this team going into the rest of the weekend. What they're relying on at this point is their 2 drivers pulling out great laps in qualifying, just performing well in general, really well in general, to get any really great result out of the weekend. And that doesn't just go for this race, but that also goes for the races coming up. They just don't have a good car, period. I honestly, it's so... I just can't believe that this team have done this season. Obviously did not change their design concept, cost themselves really at least 6 months of time that they could have had with this better concept of design for the floor and the side pod. And look where they are. Look where they are. They are absolutely nowhere. They were actually, at this point of 2022, not in the championship, but in in terms of performance, they were probably in a better position this time last year than they were, or than they are now. They look absolutely terrible at the minute. Yeah, I just don't have anything positive to say. We'll see how they do in qualifying. As we saw in Monaco, there is definitely a risk, and as we saw in Miami as well, there is definitely a risk that Mercedes could get a car knocked out in Q2, possibly even both, if their pace is even worse than what has been shown so far. I think they'll show better pace tomorrow. My prediction is 7th and 9th, which is, I think, realistically, those positions are about the best they can hope for with this car right now. Yeah, that's the best I say. And again, the only reason I think Lewis Hamilton will be up in P7 is because he is himself really fast around this track. If he wasn't, I think Hamilton would probably be more like 9th or 10th on the grid for this weekend. And Russell would be ahead of him. Maybe Russell will be ahead of him tomorrow and put in a good performance. We'll see. George Russell has not really had a good qualifying performance since the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. Russell was, I think 11th in Baku. Miami, Russell was, I think, 7th or 8th, if I remember correctly. And then in Monaco was 8th as well. So Russell hasn't had the greatest time in qualifying as of late. I know compared to Hamilton, he is beating Hamilton in the qualifying head-to-head. But yeah, he's not having the greatest time, is Russell. And yeah, there's not much more to say. Shit car. Fundamentally, really shit car, and this team is not going to make big improvements on their performance really until next season. I think they will still make improvements during this season. I don't think they're going to be the 5th best team from now on. I really would be surprised if they don't get any better throughout the season. But the improvements I'm expecting will not be enough to appease Mercedes fans. It absolutely won't be enough. And I don't see them really at all for this season being one of the 2 fastest cars on the grid. I think Aston Martin will comfortably stay ahead of them as a faster team. Whether they stay ahead of them in the championship is a different story, because of course Mercedes have a much better driver lineup that helps with them scoring a lot of the time more points than Aston Martin. That's why Mercedes are only 1 point behind Aston Martin in the championship. But yeah, I don't see at all this season, like I said, Mercedes having a car as quick as Aston Martin. I just don't see it. The only race this season where Mercedes have been quicker than Aston Martin was Melbourne. Other than that, Aston Martin have been clearly quicker in qualifying and race situations. So, real tough times at Mercedes. And if you are a Mercedes or a Hamilton or a Russell fan, it is best that you have absolutely no expectations going forward for this weekend and the next Grand Prix in Canada as well. And probably the next one in Austria, because I don't think they'll be any better there. I actually think they'll be worse in Canada and Austria, because I think those circuit layouts don't suit them as well as this one. I think this one actually suits them a bit better. So yeah, tough times at Mercedes, and we'll see whether they can perform a lot better in qualifying than what we've shown so far. But going into qualifying, I just see them as, again, 5th best team. That's how I see them. At best, maybe you could say 4th best team. Maybe I'm underselling them a tad, but even 4th best team is just nowhere near good enough for this team. Anyway, let's go on to the penultimate front-running team in 2023, Aston Martin. New front wing, new rear wing diffuser, new front nose cone. Lots of important upgrades for the Aston Martin team. And from what I've seen so far, not for this man, Lance Stroll, but for Fernando Alonso, it does look like it's working quite well. He was very quick in practice 2. He was, a 10th and a half, or just over a 10th and a half slower than Verstappen. Red Bull will pull that gap out in qualifying tomorrow and for the race, but that is very impressive because I thought Alonso wouldn't be quite that quick in the Aston Martin compared to Red Bull and Ferrari even over a single lap. So good to see that Aston Martin's upgrade, from what I have seen so far, looks to be working. Whether it truly does work, we'll have to see in qualifying tomorrow, because you never know, Ferrari might be hiding a bit of pace. Mercedes even. They really, Mercedes fans worldwide better hope they're holding back some pace because they look absolutely terrible. Yeah, from what I've seen so far, Aston Martin do look very good. And Fernando Alonso will be, at worst, in my view, top 4 in on the grid. I don't see him 5th or 6th. I did predict, of course, last night that he would be 5th for qualifying. Obviously, that was my predictions going into the weekend, having not seen all the upgrades for the teams and the performance so far. But from what I've seen after, practice 2, I think Alonso will be, again, at minimum, say 4th on the grid. And I think will produce a good enough lap to out-qualify both Ferraris and take 3rd. And as long as he has a good enough start to the race on Sunday, he should be able then to comfortably finish in 3rd place, because the Ferraris will not be able to stay with the Aston Martin in the race. But yeah, Alonso looking very good. Lance Stroll looking like absolute shit. 18th and almost a second slower than than Fernando Alonso. Again, I don't know for sure if he was on the soft or the medium when he did that lap, but that is really bad. Really, really bad. I mean, I thought he would be lacking quite a few tenths of a second to Alonso this weekend, but I didn't think he'd be that slow. That's quite bad. As long as Stroll puts it in the top 10 at worst, that would still be at least something for Aston Martin. And my prediction is he will improve tomorrow, because the Aston Martin car does look quite a bit better. And I think he'll qualify in 8th place, which is not too bad of a position for him to be in, because he'll probably gain a position or 2 from that in the race if he was to start from 8th. But yeah, for Aston Martin, looks really good. Really, really good. And I would be surprised if they don't finish on the podium the 6th time in the first 7 races. Who thought that was going to happen in 2023? We knew they were going to be quick after testing, but I don't think we knew they were going to be that consistently quick in the season so far. And final front running team, Alpine, and looks good. Esteban Ocon was 5th in practice 2. Alpine were quicker, only slightly over Ferrari. I don't think, though, that will carry through to tomorrow. I just don't see Alpine out-qualifying both Ferraris. I think that would be a major surprise to see that. And if he was to out-qualify both Ferraris, he would probably be like 4th on the grid or something like that. And I just don't see Ocon that high on the grid for Alpine. But yes, 6th is where I'm going for him. I think, again, Alpine will not be as quick as Red Bull, Aston Martin and Ferrari, but will have just enough pace to be quicker than Mercedes and be getting Ocon onto the 3rd row of the grid, which would be a great result for him. And given Ferrari's tyre issues, if he was to start from 6th and the top 10 was to finish up how I think it will, Ocon would have a pretty good chance of at least a 5th place in the Spanish Grand Prix on Sunday. Pierre Gasly, as I said earlier, is not looking that good. Didn't think he would look that great, to be honest, this weekend. He's never consistently been quick here in Spain. But yeah, he was, a quarter of a second almost down on Ocon. And given how short the lap is here in Spain, a quarter of a second's a lot of time to be losing over a, just over 70-second lap. So he needs to really cut that down to a 1/10 of a second at most. He's losing to Ocon. Ocon will be quicker than him this weekend because Esteban is just simply faster around this track. But yeah, Gasly needs to cut that down if he's to make sure he gets into Q3 and gets a decent position for Sunday's race. But yeah, Alpine look really good. And if they were to end up out qualifying Mercedes with at least one car and be not too far behind Ferrari, if not mixing it with the Ferrari team and even Aston Martin to a degree, then I think from now on, I'd have to say, actually, no, Alpine are now a front-running team at every race. Because remember, last night I said, I don't think they'll be quite a front-running team at every single race this season. I said I thought it would be only at certain races. But if they perform how they've looked so far, if they perform like that tomorrow and on Sunday, then you have to say they are consistently now a front-running Formula 1 team. But before we go on to the midfield, the proper midfield, we go back to these pictures and come to you guys in the chat to see what you guys are having to say about the running so far and what you think will go down in qualifying tomorrow. Again, if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, because tomorrow I'll be live from 11:15 AM UK time to do a practice 3 and F1 qualifying watch along, and in between those two sessions I'll be doing a watch along for the F2 sprint race as well. So if you want to keep up with the F2 action and what's going on in that series, then make sure to be around tomorrow for that. And then on Sunday I'll be doing a race preview and race watch along and race reaction for Sunday's race, and I'll be live from 12 PM UK time. So make sure to subscribe and come around for all of that content. And if everyone watching right now, I can see we're on 22 likes. Cheers for that. Let's try and get up to, say, 30 plus likes if we can by the end of the stream. That'd be great if we could do that. But, right. Let's get on to your comments. And, of course, there is a poll running at the top of the live chat. Let me know who you think's going to get pole. I can see there is one clear winner at the minute. But, yeah, let me know if you maybe want to go for someone else. Greg Martinez says Max, Alonso and Checo for the top 3. If Alonso was to split the 2 Red Bulls, that would be a truly special performance because, yeah, Red Bull, I think, clearly have the best car. Sparky Pete says Red Bull car is one of the best ever. Max showing the difference between him and Perez, same as Lewis did with Bottas. I don't hear many people just saying it's the car like they did with Lewis. Yeah, I remember, and I used to dispel it a lot when I could. People saying with Hamilton when he was dominating that, oh, it's the car, it's the car, it's the car all the time. When, I mean, yeah, the majority of the reason he was dominating that much was because of the car. But he also was, at that time, at his absolute peak, was clearly the best driver in Formula 1. And with Verstappen, it's the same situation. Yeah, the car is the best. It's the majority of the reason Verstappen is leading the championship the way he is and why he's going to win the championship. But Max is also the best driver in Formula 1 because he is consistently putting in great performances. And I don't think the only other driver out there at the minute that is consistently putting in great performances is Fernando Alonso. If you look at, Leclerc, Russell, Hamilton, they haven't been at the absolute top of their game, I think, so far this season, when Max and Fernando pretty much have. So, yeah. Right, let's find some of the comments if I can. McLaren F1 Race says, I'm still pretty confident Williams and Alex especially will be quicker tomorrow. Yeah, I think Williams will be quicker tomorrow, but it just won't be anything amazing, I don't think. Sparky Pete says, I think that Merc will be more like 4th and 5th in the Ferrari spots you have. I'd be very surprised by that. I think Mercedes have got a big problem on their hands, but maybe I'll be proved wrong. I really hope I am, because at the minute, it seems like with Mercedes, they just can't surely get any worse than they are at the minute. Right, let's find some more comments here if I can. Sparky Pete saying Mercedes shows what happens when you believe in the system than the person. They lost so many engineers to other teams. I think, yeah, to a degree that didn't help, but I mean, the issue with Mercedes pretty clearly was that they obviously the design concept they came up with for the start of these regulations last March clearly were the wrong design, and they just would not admit defeat as early as they should have. I mean, we knew, guys, didn't we, by like literally this time last year, after like I think it was the Monaco and then the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, 2 races where Mercedes was so slow. They were fighting like McLarens, Alpines, even AlphaTauris, and even Aston Martins, I think, were Mercedes at times. We knew after those races, actually, I think on June the 1st last year, I did a live stream talking about how Mercedes made their worst car in a decade. I think it is what the stream was called. We already, most of us at least, we knew their design was bad and they needed to scrap it and, go the way of their rivals, but they just wouldn't do it. They stubbornly carried on in the direction that, they wanted to go on, and they just would not admit defeat. When if they had just admitted defeat and dropped the fucking pride, Mercedes would right now be in a much better position. But no, they're now going to be having another terrible season. And now we look to 2024. And that still feels, a long way away. I mean, we're not even... We're still another, 6-7 weeks away, I think, from, the halfway point of 2023. In terms of the 2023 Formula 1 season. So, yeah. I just don't know why they stuck with that concept. Most of us knew it was a shit concept that needed to be scrapped, and they needed to, have a redesign for 2023. We were talking about this so many times last year, and if they had gone that way, they would be in a better position right now. I guarantee you that. Because look at Aston Martin. Half of their car is supplied to them by Mercedes, yet their car, which is designed the closest to the Red Bull, is the second best car in Formula 1. What a surprise. It's just so stupid. And I think because maybe of the way the 2021 championship ended, they just would not admit that Red Bull made a better car than them, and out of pride they would rather have their own concept, which nobody else, by the way, copied for good reason. Out of pride would rather just continue smashing their head against a wall, not making any progress, because that's basically what that was. With that concept. So, yeah. So stupid from Mercedes. And really, I think they've thrown away, not entirely, but I think mostly they've thrown away their chances of winning a championship, obviously this year, and probably next year and the year after as well. And really, if Mercedes are going to be looking... what do you call it? If Mercedes are going to be looking to win a title, legitimately win a title, really at this point they need to be looking at 2026, because even if they design something that is basically just a black version of the Red Bull car for next year, it'll be a lot better, but they're still probably not going to be as good as Red Bull. So, yeah, they need to really think long term of, how they need to organize the team and, what is best, clearly best for them going forward, because at the minute they are in a terrible position. Joe asks, and another question: do you think Lewis Hamilton will stay next year at Mercedes? By the way, your other question about what time does the race start? In the UK, the race starts on Sunday at 2 p.m. and it'll be a 3 p.m. start for qualifying tomorrow, again in the UK. With Hamilton, I'm still not sure he does stay at Mercedes. I know I've heard, I've heard comments from Hamilton saying, "Oh, we're just working on the details. I'm definitely going to sign." I am not believing he is staying at that team until he actually signs, because I still think, privately, he is having doubts about whether it's continue in F1 or with Mercedes. I'm not sure, but I don't think he is 100%. It's not that he's not 100%, committed. He's definitely committed. I just don't think for the future he is necessarily. I don't believe at the minute that he is necessarily committed to Mercedes, and possibly even Formula One, because at the minute Mercedes look absolutely terrible, and most likely, unless Mercedes design an amazing car next year that is so much better than this year's car, most likely the next year and the year after, they're not going to design a car that is able to win a championship. So, what does Hamilton want to do for his final F1 years? Does he want to just race to maybe finish on the podium, or does he want to maybe move to another team? Does he want to take a break from F1 and then come back into a different team that is in a better position? Who knows? But yeah, I still don't believe at the moment that he will sign. I mean, I did obviously predict last year that I don't think that I didn't think he would sign on, and that I thought he would retire from Formula One at the end of this season. I'm still going to stick with it until I'm proven wrong. Right. Let's move on for some other comments here. Sparky Pete says James Allison was put in a tricky spot this year, not being able to change the actual frame of the car. Yeah, and that's why I say that Mercedes are not going to make massive progress on their, improving their car until next year, because this car, they're basically just trying to scramble together the parts that you're going to see obviously on the Mercedes car next year. And they're now trying to, more so copy Red Bull and what they've been doing with their floor and their side pod. But they won't be able to make the fundamental massive changes to the car that really gain you loads of lap time until, again, this time next year. So, not this time next year, but, the start of next season is what I'm trying to say. But, yeah. I think Mercedes still will make progress this season. I just don't think it'll be anything massive. Maybe they'll close the gap to Red Bull by 2 to 3 tenths at most between now and the end of the season, but I mean that's still not going to be that much, is it? Given that Red Bull, in race situations, are about a second a lap quicker than Mercedes. Ronan says, "Hi Chaz, I hope your first year of uni exams went well. Almost fell asleep when watching Monaco before the rain. And also, I think Mercedes might get a podium," says Ronan. Yeah, my first year of uni isn't totally finished yet. I am still finishing my final assignment, because there's like 3 different assignments you have to do. Obviously, if the first 3 is due in January/February, and then, the final 3 are due like late May, early June. So yeah, just finishing off the final one, I think, at the minute. And then first year done. And thankfully, given the weather's really nice in the UK, and I've looked at the weather forecast for the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I was amazed at how it looks like it's going to be still consistently clear blue sky for like the next 2-3 weeks, which I'm so surprised by. Never known it as consistently sunny in my part of the UK as it's been in the last like month. I can't even remember the last time it was like legitimately cloudy for the entire day. Must have been the very start of May or something. But yeah, things are going okay. And yeah, looking forward once I get done with uni for the first year to having a bit more time on my hands to do content, obviously, do streams. But once I get my new PC, which I'm hoping to get probably towards the end of this week, maybe start of next week. Once I get that going, then I will start maybe making proper edited videos, F1 videos, which, we'll see what comes of that. I'm not going to announce anything or put any pressure on myself by saying, oh, this video is going to come out on this date, because that's where I absolutely crumble when I start doing that. But yeah, maybe we'll see some edited, recorded videos coming up in the future on my new PC. That I'll just leave it at that, I think. I do have a few ideas, but whether they actually happen or not, we'll have to see. Let's see if I can find some other comments. Ronan says, it was the car chazza. Hamilton, not as good as people thought, not on Senna's level. Ronan said, Russell said that Brazil was a false dawn with regards to the concept of the car. The thing is, and I'm frustrated with Russell, because he says that, but then I remember, I don't know if it was before or after that win in Brazil, I think it was before, I remember him coming out and saying, oh, changing the concept doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be quicker. So, Captain Hindsight a bit is George Russell. And not only was he saying that, I think there was a couple other team members from Mercedes saying, oh, well, a change in car concept doesn't necessarily mean we'll be quicker. Yes, it does. Get with the fucking program. That's what needed to be said to him. The way these regulations are, it's not that you can't innovate, but the side pod and how it fits with the floor, which is the absolute beating heart of what makes your car quick, is what matters the most with these cars. In the same way that just over 10 years ago, the diffusers and the rear end, very rear end of the car, is what mattered the most in the V8 era, when we had, the double diffuser, then the blown diffuser, and all of that stuff. That's what mattered the most. Obviously, Red Bull were the kings when it came to that area. And then the other teams were forced to copy them because that's the only choice they had. And it's similar basically to then. And that's what's going on at the minute. And that's what needed to happen from Mercedes and also Ferrari sooner than what we've seen. Ferrari, I'm not going to leave them out of it. They really should have been changing their car concept, not completely necessarily, but evolving it more so towards what Red Bull's is like through the winter of 2022 into 2023. But no, they both, Mercedes and Ferrari, stubbornly stuck with their concepts, which simply do not work, as well as the Red Bull and Aston Martin one. And then, surprise, surprise, both teams have a poor start to the season. I wonder why. And with Ronan's other comment, though, saying it was the car chassis, Hamilton was not as good as people thought. I see why you think that, but I think it's just an opinion difference at the end of the day. I think Hamilton was absolutely the best driver in Formula 1 at that particular time. I know, obviously, with with Ayrton Senna, obviously when he was at his absolute peak, he was an absolute phenom. In Formula 1, he was, when he was at his peak, clearly the best driver in Formula 1. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's hard to, not massively hard, but I think it's hard to a certain degree to compare Hamilton and Senna's eras, because in this current era, I would say 75% of the performance is down to the car. And that's me saying at least 75%. In some cases, even more, because at certain tracks, you can't really make the difference as a driver. But back in Senna's day, the drivers had a lot more. But their input and their, throttle input, brake input, steering input, car control, all of that stuff made, what do you call it? Their performance was more so, not majority down to the driver over the car, but the driver had more input into their results than the drivers have now, because the cars now are very easy to drive in comparison to the cars in the late 80s and the early 1990s. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean because Senna's era was a lot more, you could influence your results a lot more being a great driver with the way the cars were back then. That doesn't mean those drivers from that era are automatically better than your, Hamiltons, Verstappens, Alonso's, Vettel's, drivers like that. But I'm just pointing out that, again, it is hard to compare the two because the cars these days, there's not as much, there's not clear differences between, what do you call it? How am I trying to describe it? The cars are not as hard to drive, anywhere near as hard to drive as those cars were back then. And if you make the cars as easy as they are to drive now, I mean, they are still hard, of course, but they have been much harder to drive in previous generations. If you make them like that, then you get, again, a less of the driver mattering in terms of the result and performance of the car and the result you get overall. Greg Martinez says, who is a better driver, Lewis, Max with the same car? Currently, I would say Max Verstappen is the best driver. All time, I would probably say Hamilton, because I don't think Lewis Hamilton right now is in his, he's not at his absolute peak. Lewis Hamilton's peak was, say, 2017 to 2020. That was Lewis Hamilton's peak. 2018 and 19 especially, Hamilton was just amazing. Not just for how quick and talented he was. I mean, he is still obviously very quick and incredibly talented still, but the biggest thing was just how consistent and almost impossible to beat. You had to be basically perfect in those years to be having a chance of beating Lewis Hamilton. Of course, certain weekends, Mercedes in that era, 2017 to 2020, they weren't always the quickest team every single weekend. So there were definitely races where other drivers had the chances to win, and they did some of the time. But you could not be making mistakes against Lewis Hamilton, because he would, and he did, eat drivers alive for that. I mean, look at, what happened to Sebastian Vettel. Vettel made that mistake at Hockenheim, and then Hamilton absolutely rinsed him for the rest of the season. Sparky Pete says Lewis beat Max in 2021 when Max had a better car. The thing is, when I look back at 2021, I think it's a bit too... I don't think we can necessarily say that clearly there was like a better car between the Red Bull Mercedes teams in 2021, because it bounced about quite a lot. In the first 4 races, I remember Mercedes were quicker. Well, in the first 4 races, maybe not quicker, but Mercedes and Red Bull were pretty much on the same pace in the first 4 races that year. Then when we got into the European season properly, like Monaco, Baku, and then I think Austria and places like that, Red Bull were, at that point of the season, they were very quick and they had the best car. Then right before the summer break came, Mercedes got back ahead of Red Bull. And then maybe just after the summer break, you could say Red Bull were a tad quicker, but after the end of the European season, Mercedes were quite clearly faster than Red Bull. There is no doubt about that. And if I was to look at 2021, I'd probably say Mercedes had the better car than Red Bull did. Again, though, it was very close between the two, and you can't just say clearly that one team was clearly quicker than the other, because it wasn't quite like that. It was, different almost every weekend at times between the two teams. But yeah, I'd say Mercedes overall were the better team, only really because of how well Mercedes ended the season. Their car at the end of 2021 was unbelievably quick. But Hamilton and Mercedes, obviously, we know what happened in the final race. But in the races, really after Monza, where Max and Lewis crashed, Lewis and Mercedes didn't necessarily get the absolute best results they could have out of those final few races. What was it? Turkey, of course. He had a 10th-place grid penalty. And then you have, US Grand Prix. He missed out on winning that race by, a few tenths per second? What a race that was, by the way. So, those were costly moments for Hamilton and Mercedes when they were looking so good. But, yeah. I think, if you put it this way, if you're going to say Mercedes were quicker, Red Bull were quicker, that's fine. But I think it was about 50-50, around about that. I don't think we can sit here and say that, that it was like clearly Mercedes were faster, clearly Red Bull were quicker. Because I have seen certain people online say, oh, Hamilton, he put up a miracle fight against what was clearly the best car on the grid in the Red Bull, which is not true. And then again, swap it round, it's also not true that Verstappen still won the championship despite Mercedes being quite clearly quicker. Again, not true. They were pretty much through the season 50-50. Maybe it's slightly going Mercedes' way, but again, it was pretty much 50-50 through 2021. Similar kind of to 2018 with Mercedes and Ferrari, where that year, overall, I think Ferrari were the faster team, but again, it was 50-50 really throughout the entire season. It wasn't like a 75-25 split or anything like that. Anyway, enough for 2021. Will we ever forget about 2021? Not sure we will. Let's move on to the midfield teams to finish up the stream. And, oh no, we are not going to go on to Alpine. We're going to go on to the McLaren team. There you go. And still running this livery. I didn't think they were running the livery here. I thought they were only going to run it in Monaco, but seems as though they're keeping it. I didn't obviously quite see or read their announcement for this livery correctly. But honestly, if they are keeping it, that's great, because this livery is better than the one they had at the start of the season. Yeah, they didn't look... And I think in reality, they are not as bad as what they looked like in practice too. 12th and 14th they were in practice too, which sounds bad, but again, they were not that bad. Overall, it was really just the final sector, which was quite poor for them. But in the first two sectors, they were quite clearly quicker than Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri and Williams. So at worst, McLaren have the 7th best car. And I think overall for qualifying, they will have the 7th best car. In the race, that should improve to a degree, because obviously Haas, struggle with their managing their tyres, just like Ferrari do. So that should help McLaren on Sunday. But yeah, still doesn't look good enough for McLaren. The best I can see for them is, 11th and 12th, 12th, 13th, something like that with both cars. Both drivers are driving absolutely fine. getting the best out of what is a shit car from McLaren. And they're another team that, just like Mercedes, who are having a dire 2023 season in terms of their performance, because it is nowhere near the level it should be at for this team. They are, at the minute, they are much slower than Alpine. When, look at last season, Alpine were quicker, but not that much quicker. I mean, Lando finished ahead of both Alpine drivers in the Drivers' Championship, so yes, it's quite incredible how much they've dropped off this season. Still amazes me just how they've managed to get even worse. And I thought last year was probably the worst they would be for the next, say, 2 or 3 years. So, yeah, terrible from McLaren, and I'm not expecting it to get that much better this weekend. And like I said, 7th best team I think they'll be here, and they're going to need a very special lap from one of their drivers to get into Q3. That is for sure. For Alfa Romeo, Valtteri Bottas did end up in the top 10, which is good to see, but Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes was behind him in practice too, so probably not as good the Alfa Romeo performance as it seemed. And he was also just ahead of Pierre Gasly, who, if he improves his personal performance, should be ahead of Bottas, as Alpine are quite clearly quicker than Alfa Romeo. But Alfa Romeo are right there in that fight with Haas, McLaren, AlphaTauri, and Williams, really, for positions, say, from P10, if not P11, all the way to the back of the field. I think Valtteri Bottas will get into Q2 for sure. Probably will end up in the top 13 on the grid. Zhou Guanyu, man on screen, still isn't looking that quick. Was lacking, I think, a 10th or so, was it, to his teammate? I couldn't quite see, actually. Let me just see. Half a second. Yeah, about a 10th and a half overall compared to Bottas. Given how short the lap is here, that might just be a costly amount of time for Zhou to be losing to his teammate. So he can be, only just slower than Bottas, then that wouldn't be too bad for him, because he would get at least a decent position for Sunday's Grand Prix. But yeah, Alfa Romeo are not going to be in Q3. I don't see it. I don't think they've got a quick enough car. I think, by the looks of it, they are the 8th best team here in Spain, at least when it comes to qualifying. We'll see with a Valtteri, who has in the past produced incredible performances here in Catalonia. Obviously, 2019, put it on pole position, half a second clear of Lewis Hamilton. Had some great performances here for Williams. I think was 4th on the grid a couple times for Williams, around a track that you wouldn't expect that Williams back then to be that quick at. So, yeah, Valtteri really will need to pull out one of those special laps once again if they're going to get into the top 10 for the first time since the Miami Grand Prix a few weeks ago. Next team is Haas F1, who looked brilliant in practice too. Nico Hülkenberg, 3rd in practice too, only 0.3 of a second slower than Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. Nobody saw that coming. And I know it's only practice, but that is a really good omen for the weekend. And I think even if Alpine, Ferrari, and Mercedes do put themselves ahead, I still think they are best of the midfield, better than teams like McLaren, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, and Williams as well. So, as I predicted, I think Kevin Magnussen will get into the top 10, because I still think Magnussen, when it matters, will produce a better lap than Hülkenberg. Magnussen has more so got his act together over a single lap in the last couple of races compared to Hülkenberg. But I think with both cars, they could probably get like 10th and 12th, or 10th and 13th, maybe, something like that, which would be a good result after a horror show Monaco Grand Prix, where they finished 17th and 19th, was it, in Monaco? And they qualified 17th and 18th. So, yeah, much better weekend for Haas. Not looking too quick in the final sector, as we saw earlier, but in the first 2 sectors, they are right in there with teams like Alpine, even, and Mercedes as well. So, yeah, looking great for Haas, and I think they will just about sneak into Q3 yet again here in Barcelona. Of course, remember last year they got both cars into Q3. I think 8th and 9th they were on the grid with Magnussen and Mick Schumacher. Final two teams, AlphaTauri. Again, as I said earlier, they look not that good at all, but I think they are a lot better than how they looked. I expect them to be not 16th and 17th with both cars. That would be quite poor from them. And as I said earlier, they were in those exact same positions after practice 2 in Monaco, and then Tsunoda goes and puts it in the top 10 in qualifying and was running in 9th place for a long time until his brake issues when it started raining. So, yeah, do not count out AlphaTauri for a good result. Yuki Tsunoda definitely will get into Q2. Nick De Vries, be interesting to see how he does. Of course, he's raced around here plenty of times, so he should have no excuses, really. And his performance level definitely picked up in Monaco, which is good to see, with him finishing in 12th position, I think it was, for AlphaTauri. So yeah, AlphaTauri will be better tomorrow. Not good enough to get into the top 10, but they will be in the mix to maybe sneak into Q3. And if Yuki Tsunoda can keep up his amazing performances for 2023, then maybe he can cause another massive surprise and get into Q3 for the, the third time this season, I think it would be, if he was to do it. Would it be the third time? Maybe the fourth time this season, I'm not sure. But yeah, would be great if we could do that. And I think definitely it is possible, but other teams look pretty good here. And finally, we will go on to the Williams F1 team, who are comfortably, by the looks of it so far, the slowest team here in Spain. Not a surprise. Downforce is not their strong suit. Straight line speed doesn't matter that much here. Only matters really for the first sector. Saying that, we go back to the first sector. As you can see, slowest team. So, yeah, not really sure why they're still even slower in that first sector. But I think we'll see a pickup of performance tomorrow from Alex Albon. I think he'll definitely be a bit better than 19th. Logan Sargent, though, probably will stay rooted to the foot of the field and start from last place for the Spanish Grand Prix on Sunday. But Albon, even though I think he'll be better than 19th, I don't think he'll be getting out of Q1 by the looks of it. I think probably 16th, 17th is something more realistic for where he'll end up. One thing I've got to say, though, is that really from, say, P10 or a P11 back to last on the grid, it's very hard to predict how that's going to shake out because McLaren, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, Haas to a degree, they all look like they're on the same pace, really. I mean, Haas, yeah, they looked a lot quicker today, but I don't think they're going to be that quick in qualifying. It'd be amazing if they were quicker than everybody else except for Red Bull and Aston Martin, but that's not going to happen. And then, Williams obviously didn't look great in practice, Friday practice last weekend in Monaco, but then they went and put it 13th and 16th on the grid. So, yeah, Q1 and Q2 is going to be really, really close and really exciting. We could get some real surprises in in Q1 and Q2. So make sure to check out qualifying tomorrow along with yours truly. But guys, that is it for this qualifying preview. Let me just finish up the poll in the chat. Where I asked you guys, who do you think will who do you think will get pole for the Spanish Grand Prix? You guys voted overwhelmingly for Max Verstappen with 79% of the vote. Fernando Alonso ended up second with only 9% of the vote. Leclerc third with 6% of the vote. And Sergio Perez fourth with, I think, 4% of the vote. And I agree, Verstappen is not being stopped this weekend, even if it does rain. Because I've just seen, apparently, the chance of rain for tomorrow in qualifying is 60%. Whether it actually does rain or not, though, we will see. I remember, I always bring this up because it is so funny. 2018 Spanish Grand Prix, right before the race started, they showed on the screen that the FIA predicted a 90% chance of rain for the Spanish Grand Prix, and it did not see in that Grand Prix a single drop of rain. I mean, if you go and watch the race back, it was sunny for most of the race. It was just lots of dark clouds, basically, that I think they misinterpreted as rain. But yeah, don't believe the weather forecast, 100%. I mean, I didn't believe it 100%, and I was proven wrong in Monaco, but that doesn't mean it's always right, that it's going to do exactly what it says it's going to do. But yeah, thank you guys for coming along for tonight's stream. Make sure to join me tomorrow at 11:15 in the morning. Again, UK time for the Practice 3 watch along, then the F2 Sprint Race watch along, and we'll finish up with the qualifying watch along as well. And before you go, guys, make sure to smash the like button to, of course, show your support for the channel. And if you want to keep up the content on this channel, then make sure to follow me on Twitter at ChazHD5. And if you want to join our growing community here, make sure to join our Discord server. There's either a link in the live chat or a link in the description down below. So if you want to join our community, make sure to go ahead and join. Of course, if you join the Discord server, you also get notifications regularly as to when I am, uploading, live streaming content. So, yeah, make sure to join the Discord if you want to be a part of that. But until qualifying day tomorrow, guys, at 11:15 in the morning, my time, UK time, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.